Shalom and welcome once again, everyone, to another teaching from Messianic Delaware. My name is Jerry Mitchell, your host today from Messianic Delaware. It is such an honor and a pleasure to have you join us as we search through the language, the culture, and the history to find the truth revealed in the words of our Creator. And you know what? This is going to be exciting because you're going to learn something today, uh, that you may have suspected but weren't sure about. And I really, really hope that this is a blessing to you as we dig through this because we're going to continue learning about Passover. Is there more to it? Is there something we don't recognize? Now, we know that Passover is an event, right? It's a single event, but there's things that build up to Passover. And then uh, right in the middle here, we have this event that is absolutely central and critically crucial to the crucifixion. Okay? There's a preparation before, as I said, and the conclusion afterwards. There's the building up to it. What happened? Where's it going from? What's it doing? And then we have the actual action of the event, and then afterwards we see how things play out. And we're going to learn that uh, over a period of time, something happened that you might not be really expecting. Okay? We know that blood is shed at Passover. That is a given. It has to be, right? Without blood, there's no remission of sin, right? That whole concept of going out of the house of bondage is central to the blood being shed, whether it's the blood of the lamb at the first Passover while they were still in Egypt, or whether it was 2,000 years ago when Yeshua shed blood hanging on a cross while the lambs were finished being slaughtered for Passover that year. But what else could there be? What else is there? Is there something we're missing? Well, yes and no. Well, I think what we're doing is we're taking these little bits and little pieces and we're trying to separate them out, but we're never really seeing how they fit together. Let's take a look at Numbers 9, 1 through 14 again. And I'm not going to read the whole thing. I'm only going to read part of this. And really, what I want to pay attention to, you'll see. And let's begin in Numbers 9. Okay, and it says, the Lord spoke to Moses in the wilderness of Sinai in the first month of the second year after they were come out of the land of Egypt. So this is the very next year. Okay, they're out of Egypt. They've had one Passover. They went through all the rites, all the things that went to it, okay? This is the following year after the golden calf incident now. All right, so they're still in the wilderness. And what's going on? He said, let the children of Israel also keep the Passover at this appointed season. In the 14th day of this month, at even, you will keep it in his appointed season, according to all the rites of it, and according to all the ceremonies thereof, you will keep it. Moses spoke to the children of Israel that they should keep the Passover, and they kept the Passover on the 14th day of the first month at the evening in the wilderness of Sinai, according to all the Lord commanded Moses. So did the children of Israel. Okay, that pretty much describes that they went through and did pretty much a repeat of what happened 1 year before that, right? They took their lambs and they divided them out properly. They brought them into the house. They did all the things that they were supposed to do. It says so right there in Numbers chapter 9. It says they did exactly all the rites of it, right? That's what it reads. So we have to presume, we have to think in this case, because it tells us that they did it all. So we have to believe now that they did it all. They did everything that they were supposed to do. All right? Joshua 5 describes the first Passover in the land. Even though for 40 years all of the children who had been born into the wilderness had not been circumcised, they were keeping the Passover every year for 40 years without being circumcised, all the people who were born in the wilderness. So maybe not for 40 years, but at least for probably 36, 37 years, the oldest ones would have been keeping Passover without being circumcised. That's important, especially in later societies and in today's society as well. Joshua 5, 10 and 12. On the even of the 14th day of the month, while camped at Gilgal in the plains of Jericho, the Israelites celebrated the Passover. The day after the Passover, on that very day, they ate some of the produce of the land. Did you catch that? They didn't eat it for the meal. They ate it the next day. They ate some of the produce of the land. Unleavened bread and roasted grain. The manna stopped. The manna stopped the day after they ate this food. So, there was no longer any manna. Now they're eating from the land. Things are beginning to transition. Things are beginning to transition. Okay? But let's move on from there because we discussed this last time. I just wanted to give you a basic layout so that we could remember what was going on. Excuse me. Now, 2 Kings reads that Josiah was 8 years old when he became king. 18 years later, so now we have Josiah at 8 years old. 18 years later, the high priest Hilkiah found the book of the law. All right, are we ready for this? This is where things get interesting. After the king heard the words of the Torah scroll, remember, Hilkiah had to find it. Then they read it to the king. The king heard the words of the Torah scroll. He tore his clothes. Then the king commanded Hilkiah the Kohen, the priest, Ahikam, the son of Shaphan, Hachbor, the son of Micaiah, Shaphan the scribe, and Isaiah, the king's servant. He said, "Okay, fellas, you go inquire of Adonai for me, for the people, and for all of Judea, about the words this scroll that was found. For great wrath of Adonai is kindled against us, since our fathers have not obeyed the words of this book, to do everything written here that concerns us." Okay? That was his first response. He said, look, God's going to be mad at us. We have been messing up. I was 8 when I took the throne. I didn't know about this. It's been almost 20 years, guys. What's going on? How come nobody has come to me with this before? What's going on? Go find out what we're supposed to do. You go ask the Almighty. Right? That's what he's saying here. Let's continue. In 2 Kings 23, 21 through 23. The king commanded all the people, saying, "Celebrate the Passover to Adonai your God, as it is written in the book of the covenant." Wait a minute. The king commanded all the people, saying, "Celebrate the Passover to Adonai your God, as it is written in the book of the covenant. For no Passover like this had been celebrated from the days of the judges who judged Israel, or in all the days of the kings of Israel and the kings of Judah. But in the 18th year of King Josiah, this Passover was observed for Adonai in Jerusalem." So how do you think they would have celebrated Passover? Exactly the way they did it in the wilderness. Because Moses had written it down that this is what you do. And that's exactly what they did. They followed the instructions. They celebrated Passover exactly according to the instructions. Do I need to say that again, that they celebrated Passover according to the instructions? All right. Let's let's keep going because this is where things get really, really interesting. Hezekiah in Second Chronicles 30, 1 through 5. I'm sorry, let me start over. Hezekiah sent word to all Israel and Judah, and also wrote letters to Ephraim and Manasseh to come to the house of Adonai at Jerusalem to keep the Passover for Adonai, the God of Israel. The king and his officials and the entire congregation in Jerusalem had decided to celebrate Passover in the second month, for they were not able to celebrate it at the regular time, since not enough priests, Kohanim, had consecrated themselves, nor had the people assembled in Jerusalem. The matter seemed right in the eyes of the king and the entire community, so they decided to issue a decree and to proclaim it throughout Israel from Beersheba to Dan, calling the people to come to Jerusalem to celebrate the Passover for Adonai, the God of Israel, for it had not been celebrated as prescribed for a long time. And they're still not celebrating it as prescribed. Remember, if you look up there, it's going to be in the second month. Because why? Well, there wasn't enough priests to do it in the first month. Now, why did they need priests now? What's going on? What's happening? What is this thing that we see in Chronicles that we don't see before that? To get to that answer, let's go look at Ezra. Now, Ezra, they're coming back from Babylon, right? Just like Nehemiah, they're coming back, and they're getting ready to do these things. The exiles Ezra 6:19 through 21. The exiles celebrated the Passover on the 14th day of the month. For every one of the priests and the Levites had purified themselves, and all of them were ceremonially pure. They slaughtered the Passover lamb for all the exiles, and for their fellow Kohanim, and for themselves. So those of Bnei Yisrael, the sons of Israel, who had returned from the exile, ate it, together with all who had separated themselves from the impurity of the nations and the land to seek Adonai, the God of Israel. Who changed the way Passover was celebrated? That's a legitimate question here, isn't it? If we really dig in and think, wait a minute, we observed a change. We saw something happen. We observed an absolute positive, well, I don't know if it's positive change, but it was a change. It certainly changed. Instead of making sure and making certain that we observed Passover with all of its rites and all of its celebrations and everything that goes with it the way Moses wrote it down, now all of a sudden we've changed it. God didn't change it, we changed it. We changed it to suit ourselves because now the priests are saying, well, we're in charge. We're going to do it our way. We can't do it this other way anymore. We can't trust the people to do it that way. We have to do it for them. So they are the ones who slaughtered the Passover lamb for all the exiles and for their fellow Kohanim and for themselves. Now, if you remember back in 1 Chronicles, it says that God handed David the temple services. There's nothing to indicate, let me say this again, there's nothing to indicate that this particular temple service was part of that. Everything up until this point, well, we see a little bit of a change, right, in Kings, a little bit of a change. But here, what we see are the priests really taking over and saying, here's how we're going to do this. They are the ones who set up the temple services for this. Something this important, everything else that was really drastically important was noted. This is just kind of a footnote, I guess we could say, when it says that they slaughtered the Passover lamb for all of the exiles and for their fellow priests and for themselves. Now, when was the decision made that they had to be ceremonially pure? When back, remember in Numbers chapter 9, it says even if you touch a dead body, you can eat Passover. Even if you're in a foreign land somewhere else, you can celebrate Passover. No matter what happens, you can do that. But it hadn't been done. It simply hadn't been done. They had turned things around to such a way, to such a degree, that it simply was no longer done. Now, I'm going to cut this teaching just a little shorter than I normally would have it because I need the time next time to go on from where I'm going. But I need to make sure that we look at a couple of the prophets. Okay? I'm going to start in Ezekiel chapter 45, where it says, in the first month, on the 14th day of the month, you will have Passover, a feast of 7 days, when matzah will be eaten, unleavened bread will be eaten. If you know about the end of Ezekiel, the last several chapters from 40 through 48, I believe, it says it, it, it looks at the millennial kingdom. But there's things in there that don't appear to be from the proper time period. Okay? There's discussion about there may have been some things added to Ezekiel, which is perfectly fine because it's not part of the books of Moses. Okay? You can add these things to Ezekiel to give the illusion that the priests were more in charge, because it talks about the Levitical priesthood in the millennial kingdom. Now, for everyone who recognizes that it will be Yeshua who is the high priest, and he does away with that Levitical priesthood, this gives us some issues and some problems, doesn't it? Which is why there's discussion about what was added here. What we are pretty sure of, okay, from everything that I can read, what we are pretty sure of is that Ezekiel did say that on the 14th day of the first month you're going to have a Passover, and it's going to be followed by unleavened bread. And that we know that's going to happen in the millennial kingdom. We see other feasts in the millennial kingdom as well. We see the Feast of Tabernacles, Sukkot, played out in Zechariah, right? We see other feasts taking part and allusions to these feasts in even the end of Isaiah. Even in the end of Isaiah, we see that there's going to be Shabbat, there's going to be the new moon services, there's going to be all of these things that are taking place that we are going to be observing, and we're going to be celebrating, we're going to be participating in and with. So it's absolutely plausible that we could see Passover in the millennial kingdom as according to Ezekiel 45. But let's continue here for a second. We know that Passover suffers some changes at the hands of man, right? We can see it, we understand it, we can read it. We know that these things are evolving. And it's not our Creator that is causing them to evolve, but it is man that is causing them to evolve. What's really interesting is that these things lead to new changes and new traditions. And what's really fascinating is how these new traditions, God actually incorporates them and points directly to the crucifixion of the Messiah and saying, here's how we're going to play this out. Just watch how I use your traditions against you. Watch how I use your changes against you. Watch how I do these things, and just see how you're going to cover this one up. And that's exactly what they did. They tried to cover it up. You'll see by the dates of the way we calculate first fruits, that they tried to cover it up so it doesn't always fall on the same day. There's just so many different ways of looking at this that it's ridiculous. But the one thing we can be absolutely certain of is that our Creator will restore His appointed times, and we will learn to keep them according to all the rites and ceremonies that our Creator intended them to have. They're going to go right straight back to exactly the way He wants them done. Um, and they're going to do that because our Creator never leaves anybody in their comfort zone, ever, does He? In fact, He is always telling somebody to move. He moved Abraham out of where he was comfortable, right? He moves David out of where he's being comfortable. You know, David was probably quite comfortable looking forward to being a shepherd. You know, he says, I'm out here in the peace and quiet. I can deal with my sheep. You know, that's no problem. But instead of that, God said, no, 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 David, you're too comfortable there. You're going to be king. He even moved Paul, out of being in line, I think, and I'm going to speculate, so here's my speculation warning, that Paul probably had his sights set on being high priest. And God said, no, Paul, I got better things for you to do. I'm taking you out of even your comfort zone, and I'm going to put you here. And instead of being a high priest in the temple, he wound up in prison. He wound up in some bad places. He wound up doing things he never thought he would be doing. That was Paul. The Almighty has this really unique way of being able to turn things around for His purpose and for His glory and for His appointed times. We have to be able to recognize that. And recognizing the changes that happen to Passover as it, and this is a dangerous word to use here, as we allowed it to evolve instead of maintaining it and guarding it the way we should have, we allowed it to change and to evolve into what it is. Now, in next time, you're going to see how it evolves even further, okay? But for now, I'm going to, like I said, I'm going to leave this a little bit short because this particular teaching is setting you up for something even more spectacular. Even more spectacular. If you can believe that, there's things that we have not considered Passover to look at. There's things that we have considered Passover to be immune from, I guess we could say. And man-made changes is part of that, isn't it? Well, it's always been that way. We've always done it this way. No, we haven't. No, we haven't. And you're going to see even more of that. Thank you so much for joining me. And please give a listen to Messianic Delaware's teachings. There's a lot of information out there. Don't forget Matthew 5, 6, and 7. There's a lot of information there that everybody needs to know. Go back and listen to that. It's absolutely super fantastic, even though I'm the one that put it together. There's a lot of information there. There's a wealth of information there to listen to. Thank you once again. Everyone, please have a wonderful, wonderful week. Shalom.